Chances are that your company is participating in, I hate to say it, cult-like activity. I'm sure this is going to come as a shock. So, let me be more specific. Your company is very likely emulating practices it sees in other companies without really understanding the context behind those practices, what made them successful, what makes them work. The term that is applied to that behavior is called cargo cult. And most companies, teams, and many, many individuals fall into these cult-like behaviors over and over again. I'm Russ Halliday. Welcome to the channel. The term cargo cult isn't a compliment. It's used to describe a set of belief systems and customs and practices that people routinely practice without understanding the why behind them. And there are many in the workplace. The term originally came about in the latter stages and aftermath of World War II, and most specifically in the South Pacific Islands around that time. The South Pacific was a significant theater of war, of course, and Allied bases cropped up on numerous islands in the region. The indigenous people on the islands would see the Allies constructing airfields, military facilities, and would see vast amounts of Western supplies and technologies coming in via airplane. They'd witness the planes landing, soldiers unloading the goods, and various related activities associated to the war effort. But after the war, the Allied forces left the region. The indigenous people, they formed a bit of an association between the Western arrivals and their own newfound prosperity, and they began to engage in practices and rituals intended to attract the return of these goods and, of course, Western prosperity. This often included the construction of makeshift airways, control towers, and imitation aircraft, and all of this was just made from local materials, palm trees, all in the belief that these rituals were the activities that brought the cargo. So the term cargo cult was coined by Western observers to describe these practices and beliefs, and often with a very derogatory and negative tone. The Western perspective on these rituals framed them as superstitious and misguided attempts to gather material wealth, despite not having the cultural and historical context that led to their development. It's important to note that cargo cults were quite diverse, with different beliefs and practices on the various islands. And while the term is mainly connected to the South Pacific, similar phenomena have been observed in other parts of the world as well, often in response to encounters with more technologically advanced cultures. Or, in the case of business, in response to encounters with more successful enterprises. And that's where we will connect the dots to your company. Chances are pretty good that certain practices, and quite possibly many of them, were adopted based on what other organizations are doing. That part's pretty natural. But all too often, they're adopted without understanding what makes them work or not work at the companies who have been successful with them. Let's take a very common and very glaring example of where this happens. And that's when many companies undergo their agile transformation. Very often, companies aren't very clear on what they're trying to get out of such a transformation, and yet look out into the world and see what other companies have done. So you can pick your agile buzzwords: Scrum, extreme programming, Kanban, although technically that's lean, SAFe, the Spotify model, and so on. What all of these have in common is that the business landscape is littered with troubled and failed implementations of these systems. One of the problems is that companies eagerly try to adopt the mechanisms without trying to understand the business realities behind the models to determine how they fit or don't fit in their own context. So the result winds up being a blind copy of process or procedure or org structure, or very commonly a combination of all three, without knowing what the heck these are even supposed to do and why. This leads to friction between, in the agile case, engineering and other parts of the business, and lots of time and wasted effort performing rituals that don't really yield any useful outcomes. But that's only one example. Let's look at a bunch of other ways cargo cult behaviors have likely infiltrated your business. 1. Rote procedures. In some workplaces, employees may follow procedures and protocols to the letter without understanding their purpose or adapting them to changing circumstances. They do things this way because that's the way we've always done it, whether or not the procedure serves a useful purpose. Number 2, superficial practices. Like a smaller version of the agile example I gave earlier, this involves adopting practices without understanding their significance. For example, a company might adopt some trendy new technology or productivity system. AI, anyone? Without necessarily understanding how it fits into their particular context and leading back to a complete lack of meaningful results. One of my favorites, and one that has shown up again and again, is copycat leadership. This is a big one, and I suspect many of you will have seen it too. Some leaders just emulate the behaviors and practices of successful leaders without understanding the underlying principles or what made those leaders effective in the first place. And this mimicry generally results in ineffective and inflexible leadership that can fail to adapt to its own situation. So you've probably had senior executives, CEOs who all believe they're Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. That's an example. Chances are pretty good they're not. Both of those people came out of very particular contexts, and just emulating what they do is not likely to yield the results that they achieved. Metric-driven decisions. You've probably heard or even used the term data-driven decision. I personally feel a better term would be a data-informed decision. It's easy to become overconfident in metrics and KPIs without really understanding their broader context. And I have a video on this exact topic, which I will link somewhere in one of these two neighborhoods. Resistance to change. So it's generally been my experience that people are the most resistant to change when they just don't understand what the changes are for and what the net benefit is going to be for them or for the business. And so if you see resistance to change in your organization, that could very well be that proverbial canary in the coal mine, indicating that people are being asked to adapt without having an understanding as to why. Number 6, lack of critical thinking. This one hurts, and it sucks to recognize when you look around that no one is really applying any really disciplined critical thought to any of the work that they're doing, but it does happen. In cargo cult workplaces, critical thinking and problem-solving skills will be underutilized, and employees will continue with certain practices or strategies without ever questioning their effectiveness or exploring better alternatives. The last one I want to talk about is a little bit more subtle. Emphasis on appearances. Focusing on appearances such as a polished image or facade or, a really, really spit clean brand can also be a form of cargo cult behavior. In those environments, the emphasis is on projecting success or conformity over actually achieving it. And you wind up in the situation where beneath the veneer, not much is working well. Now, as I said earlier on, I would be shocked if upon hearing that list, you couldn't relate to any of them. But if that's the case, you know what? Congratulations. The stain of the cult is likely not in your organization. However, for the rest of us, and it's going to be most of us, we'll see that these behaviors, and likely several of them, occur in our workplaces. So, what can we do about it? Chances are pretty good that the problem is cultural, and it's not just one or two small things that need to be fixed. And in that case, it's a campaign and a war, not a simple battle to address. But my approach would be this. Imagine that you are in a room full of broken things. Pick something up, fix it, and then show everyone what you've done, and maybe most importantly of all, why is it working better? If people buy into the reason that you fixed this and the reason that the changes are worthwhile, they will generally help you achieve them. Don't just show them the output, show them the better outcome. And then do it again with a second and a third. And you know what's going to happen? Before long, you're going to have allies, people who are either helping you directly or people who, you know what, they've just followed your cue and they've also decided to pick something broken up and fix it. One person being brave enough to lead and tough enough to endure how long it can take to do so can change an entire company and even wipe out a cult. So Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you in the next one.